got a lot of arms and legs to do that with now. So I think that's a real issue, and I suppose from what I see is, I come from a permaculture perspective. In permaculture, we think of nature as the master of design, right? In nature, there are no waste. There's only byproducts that feed into other products. And a lot of the conventional industrial agriculture systems that I see, and my day job is involved in agriculture as well, is that you see systems that are essentially linear, right? And what I mean by linear is you have inputs, and then you have a production, and then you have an output, which is a product, and then you have waste, right? And that's a real issue, because we're just building up waste and we're not efficient. We're not using the resources as well as we can. We're not creating closed loop systems so that we regenerate things. And what we need is actually what I call circular systems or closed loop systems. And I think there's a term out there now called circular economies. There's a lot of work done in Rotterdam on circular economies, where you're basically tying not only your industrial agriculture but your whole industrial base together, so that you start looking at it basically as a whole ecosystem. And then you start tying the inputs and the outputs together to actually produce stuff more efficiently, but also create regenerative, sustainable type agriculture. And when we look at permaculture system, that's kind of what we do. We're looking at basically getting things from nature, but actually helping nature on the way. So when we leave the land alone, it's the same, if not better, than when we left it. So I think there is a real question. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to remember the question, but it's about climate change.
That's into it very well. How sustainable are our current farming and or fishing practices?
Right.
And what impact are we having on soil, water ecosystems, and on the climate?
So I think Mike's covered the soil and the environment very well, and I think what we're seeing is there's a systemic issue there. And those issues need to be corrected by a fundamental shift in how we approach food systems.
Cool, thanks for that. Gary?
Yeah, well, if you've got the point by now that industrial agriculture is not a very good thing, you might be starting to get there. My comment would be is industrial agriculture doesn't stand by itself. It's part of the urban industrial complex. In fact, it's probably part of the urban industrial military complex, actually. And so, because you're living in an urban area, don't think you're not part of the industrial agricultural system, and you're not actually supporting it in all sorts of ways. And those farms, they're actually only just trying to grow your food. So, to me, the issue is that industrial agriculture has been a total disaster, basically. Particularly ever since probably the beginning of the 20th century, and the way it has gone. And the issue is, in terms of comes to sustainability, it's just utterly and completely unsustainable, because it destroys natural systems. It destroys forests, it destroys soil. And it's the destroyed soils the reason why the urine gets through into the river. The urine is a byproduct that should be recycled as tin said within a natural ecosystem, and animal systems and grasslands recycle the nutrients and they go back, and they don't go down and pollute the waterway, because that's just a waste of good nitrogen. It's been fixed out of the air. It's really hard to fix the nitrogen out of the air. So ecosystems, good functioning ecosystems, don't waste nitrogen. And that's what we have very degraded systems that we talk about in agriculture now, which is the issue to me. So that when you come back, well, what you're going to do about this, it's you have to get right away from industrial agriculture, because if we are maybe talking about climate change in terms of, which is one of the aspects of unsustainability of our whole system, and probably just one of them, to me, it's like, it's not there's too much CO2 in the atmosphere, because actually the amount of CO2 produced by burning fossil fuels is not large compared to the carbon cycle. The carbon cycle is the basic cycle of life. You know, organic chemistry, carbon-based chemistry, all of life has carbon, all of life recycles carbon, has sinks in the ocean, has sinks in the atmosphere as well. And it's huge exchanges taking place in carbon all the time. Every living creature exchanges carbon, or mineral exchanges carbon as well. Calcium carbonates and things like that. And so it's all about a whole cycle thing. And the irony to me is that the small amount of CO2 put into the atmosphere is not the issue. It's that when burning it, we cut down forests and destroyed soil. The machines that ran on that oil destroyed the very thing that would make use of that CO2. CO2 is food to a tree. CO2 and water, that's how the sunshine may make carbohydrates. That's how they function. So CO2 is not a waste product. It's like Tim was saying, it's like we see these things as waste products in there. To nature, that's something that something else uses. And so my always think is, well, if you don't know what to do, just go past bloody trees. Not a good start. But there's also a huge amount of life under the soil we don't recognise. There's more carbon stored under the soil than there is in all the trees, all the vegetation, all the living creatures, including you and me, on top of the soil. Right? There's more carbon and life in the soil. And so when we destroy soil, and we destroy that life, what happens to the carbon? The CO, the carbon dioxide or the methane comes out and it can't be recaptured and taken again. So to me, the big questions in terms of the social questions, I think we all know that the whole system's unsustainable. And it's all driven by cheap energy from oil we dig out of the ground. The question is, I think we're going to learn from why it's unsustainable, and therefore what do we do about it? And to me, the whole urban-rural divide is the problem. Why is there a huge amount of food grown in the city? Why is urban separate from rural, separate from food growing? Why don't you know how to grow food? Could you people go and grow all the food yourselves, feed yourselves? I bet you can't. No? You should at least know how to grow food. At least your basic food. And so food should be grown locally, out of a local environment, to feed a local population. And that's the problem with cheap energy and transport and industrial agriculture, transport all around the world. We export biscuits to Australia, and Australia exports biscuits to New Zealand. How bloody crazy is that? So it's a few big issues around lack of sustainability.
Can I just add a couple of things that I forgot? One of the things you need to understand how unsustainable industrial agriculture is that the huge amount of nitrogen that we're talking about going into these systems is being fixed from the atmosphere using fossil fuels. So whereas 40 years ago we used to fix nitrogen using clover in our pastures, we now take a third of our nitrogen comes from Maui gas field, the rest comes from the Middle East. So we're taking fossil fuels and turning them into nitrogen. We humans now artificially create nitrogen, or take it from one form to another to use it in agriculture. We do more than all of the natural systems put together now. That's how overpowering we've become. Some researchers in Sweden have been doing this work on planetary boundaries, and so they've calculated some boundaries for lots of things that we use. Nitrogen boundary, we more than twice as much nitrogen now in flux than the planet can handle under these boundaries that they've calculated. Phosphorus or phosphate, we are now almost exactly double the planetary boundary for phosphorus. And the issue is, that this stuff ends up in the waterways because, like Gary said, it should be being cycled within the system, but it's not. We're treating it as a problem, as a waste issue that we just dump down our rivers and send out to sea or into our lakes, but most of it out of the system, taken out of the cycle, and that's where it causes the problems, and we have these huge impacts on life. So we have to realise just how far we've gone outside the ability of the system to be able to handle what we've done.
Thanks for summing up all those very, very complicated issues. We're doing all right for time, so we can probably take a few questions from the audience. Anyone has any questions, please raise your hand.
Just for yourself there, you were kind of saying, maybe we should all grow our own food, and I know it was a rhetorical question when you were like, why don't we all grow our own food living in the city, and why do the industrial farmers? I wouldn't really know, but I imagine it's because it's so much more efficient for one guy to have an enormous farm, and make enormous amounts of sheep and have all the cows and make all the milk, and he can feed so many more of us than if we all had one cow each. It would be so inefficient. I think that's the reason. Surely I thought that was the whole point, that it's so efficient that we can have so much food. That's the whole thing about industrial agriculture. It's great. I would have thought, not great in general, but that's the plus side of it.
If I could be a bit blunt there, you've very well spoken the propaganda. If you grow food in your own backyard and it goes straight to you, it's far more efficient. Alright? It's very inefficient to have one or two people with lots of machines on a large block of land that's been degraded and not grown properly, and therefore fertilisers are applied and the urea and all that, and then transport it with fuel guzzling trucks to you in the city. This is the thing about so strange in our society, that we have this idea of specialisation and the rural area is separate and food grown is separate, and it's all very efficient. It's just complete nonsense, actually. In terms of what I mean by efficient, it might be monetarily efficient in terms of the present market economics we're in. Right? And that's about as far as it goes. Right? There's no way that that is more efficient than people feeding themselves in their own community gardens or own backyards, or when swapping their pumpkins with onions over the fence. You know?
Can I just add to that? When you've got one bloke or one corporation growing a lot of one thing, let's just say it's a plant of celery, right? You're growing all of one product, so you're not actually mimicking a natural system. So automatically, just by nature's laws, you're actually handicapped. And to actually deal with that, you've actually got to start looking at herbicides and pesticides, because the natural predators won't be around, right? The biosphere won't be around to actually support that. When you're growing a natural system, there's all the different limits and controls that are introduced by the bugs, by the microbes, by the plants, by the environment to actually make that a balanced system. And that's why in the monoculture systems we've got such a problem.
Shifts to regulate that cadmium-rich phosphorus, isn't it?
It's just the phosphate. There isn't anything, like there's other parts of the world where you can get it from that's lower.
Yeah.
But and it has been, we've wiped out Nari now, there is no more. There's a bit of clean-up going on there now. But there is a real shortage of it. There's a worldwide limit, America's not letting their stuff go, which is low in cadmium, so they're going to hang on to it. So then you just get, countries fighting over what's left. But because we're already so high, our soils are already so high, it takes very little to tip them over the limit now. So while the fertiliser companies are trying to source the low cadmium phosphate, we're still putting on 30 to 40 tonnes of cadmium, not 30, 40 tonnes of pure cadmium onto our soils every year, even though we're sourcing this low cadmium phosphate. So it's just, beggars can't be choosers. There's just nothing left, and this farming systems are set up so they can't go without it. The whole model is busted kind of thing. Yeah.
Is there a safe level of dairy we can produce that wouldn't deplete soil and pollute our rivers and so on and so forth?
Yeah.
And what kind of percentage would that be of current production that would allow our current system to also recover?
I think that, I would like to see, like I said in the beginning, I think that animals have to come out of agriculture for us to survive long term on this planet. But given, that we're expecting 8 or 9 billion people, then we can't. The limits of energy transfer will tell you that you can't have animals in the system and have other species besides us. So that's, the bigger question. But short term, yeah, we had a much more sustainable level of dairy just going back 30, 40 years. We were probably closer to 1 cow per hectare when we were talking about 3 cows or more, 3.5 cows per hectare now. It's artificially high. The land couldn't support that stocking rate because there wouldn't be enough feed to feed the cows. It's only there because we pump it up. We're the biggest global user of palm kernel. So of all the countries in the world, New Zealand uses more than anybody else, and that goes to feed our cows to be able to carry that. There's nothing more unsustainable than that. We have defined unsustainable farming. No, that's probably not true. I'm sure that there are systems worse than ours, but we're getting right up there. So back to your question, if we got back to, say, a cow per hectare or less, if we have to have dairy, then that would be much more likely to be sustainable. The soil would be healthy, the rivers would be healthier.
Can I just make a comment on that too? Because I have a slight different perspective than Mike on that. In terms of, to me, it is that how it fits in with that natural ecosystem, what the nature of it is, and how you treat the animals and the plants and everything. And you can be just as unsustainable and just as ridiculously mining of the soil with cropping as you can with animals. It's a matter of the health of the system and how you do it that I'll say is a really fun. You can do it, of course you can.